The air in Carol's room smelled like antiseptic and something else, something sweeter, almost cloying, like decaying lilies. They lined the windowsill, their heads drooping, mirroring Carol's own fragile state. The scent was a cruel reminder of the life draining from her, of beauty wilting into dust. I was there, holding her hand, feeling the paper-thin skin stretch taut over her frail bones. The veins, blue and prominent, pulsed weakly beneath my touch. It was a stark contrast to the strong, capable hands I had always known, the hands that meticulously arranged the flowers in the vase, the hands that deftly wielded the carving knife during holiday dinners. Now, those hands were skeletal, vulnerable. Mark, my husband, stood at the foot of the bed, his face a mask of grief. His shoulders were slumped, his usual vibrant energy replaced with a heavy weariness. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, even though I knew it wouldn't. But I also felt this hollow emptiness inside. It was a vast, echoing void where I should have felt something, sorrow, empathy, perhaps even a twinge of guilt. But there was only the emptiness. Carol, the woman who had been a constant source of criticism and passive-aggressive digs since the day I met Mark, was dying. And I was supposed to feel, what? Sad. I felt more like a participant in a play, reciting lines I didn't believe, doing what was expected of me. The dutiful daughter-in-law, the supportive wife. The roles felt foreign, ill-fitting. Carol's illness had been swift and merciless. Pancreatic cancer. She'd been diagnosed just 3 months earlier, and now, here we were, at the end. Those 3 months had been a whirlwind of hospital visits, consultations with oncologists, and the gradual, agonizing decline. The Carol I knew, the sharp-tongued, impeccably dressed woman who could make a casual remark feel like a personal affront, had been reduced to a shell. The chemo had ravaged her body, stealing her hair, her strength, and finally, her life. Mark had been devastated. He'd spent every waking moment by her side, refusing to leave her alone, clinging to the hope of a miracle that never came. I, on the other hand, felt. I don't know. Numb, maybe? Or maybe it was just the constant barrage of her criticisms that had built up a wall around my heart, a protective barrier against the sting of her disapproval. The first time I met Carol, I'd been so excited. Mark had been dating me for a year, and I finally got the coveted invite to Sunday dinner at his parents' place. It felt like a significant milestone, a signal that I was finally being accepted into his inner circle, his family. I'd spent hours getting ready, choosing the perfect outfit, a simple, elegant dress that I thought screamed respectable, but stylish. It was a pale blue, the color of a summer sky, and I paired it with a delicate silver necklace, a gift from my grandmother. I even baked a pie. Apple. From scratch. My grandma's recipe, the one I'd inherited when she passed away. Baking was my love language. It was how I showed people I cared, how I tried to create moments of warmth and comfort. I remember the drive over, the nervous flutter in my stomach, the way I kept checking my appearance in the rearview mirror. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted Carol to like me. I wanted to prove that I was worthy of her son. Carol opened the door, and her smile, it didn't quite reach her eyes. It was a polite, social smile, the kind you offer strangers on the street. There was a slight tightness around her mouth, a flicker of something unreadable in her gaze. "Oh, you must be the girlfriend," she'd said, her voice dripping with an undertone of something. Disapproval? Disappointment? I'd handed her the pie, beaming, hoping to impress. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples wafted from the box, and I felt a surge of pride. I'd poured my heart into that pie. She'd taken one look at it and said, "Well, it's certainly rustic." Rustic? My grandma's prize-winning apple pie. The words were a subtle jab, a gentle put-down disguised as an observation. I remember the feeling of my cheeks burning, the sudden deflation of my excitement. From that moment on, it was a constant stream of backhanded compliments and pointed remarks. My cooking wasn't up to her standards. Interesting flavor combinations, dear, but perhaps a bit experimental. My decorating choices were a bit bold. My job as a teacher was admirable, but hardly stimulating. She'd subtly undermine me in front of Mark, whispering things like, "You deserve better, darling. Better than me." Like I wasn't good enough for her precious Mark. She'd make comments about how the house could use some professional help, or how the clothes I wore were rather casual. I always felt like I was walking on eggshells around her, desperately trying to please, to earn her approval, which, of course, never came. I'd tried, God, I'd tried. I'd brought flowers, sent cards, and volunteered to help with anything she needed. I'd offered to help with her garden, to take her shopping, even to simply spend time with her. But nothing was ever enough. She would always find some fault, some flaw, some reason to make me feel inadequate. It was a constant, insidious erosion of my self-esteem. I'd spent years trying to decode her moods, to understand what she wanted, to find the magic formula that would finally earn her approval. But I never succeeded. Now, years later, as she lay dying, I was still there, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law. Mark had been inconsolable, so I'd swallowed my resentment and taken on the role of caregiver. I'd cooked her bland, hospital-approved meals, carefully measuring the portions and avoiding any spices she might find too exciting. I'd read her books, her preferences shifting daily. I'd endured her weak, yet still pointed, criticisms. She'd comment on how tired I looked as if I was the one dying, her voice thin and reedy, the words still carrying a sting. The whole time, I had this growing sense of anticipation. Not of her death, but of something else, something intangible. A whisper of a possibility. A hidden truth. I knew that when she went, a part of me, a weight, would lift. The hospice nurse had told us she wouldn't last the night. The words hung in the air, heavy with the imminence of death. Mark had collapsed into a chair, his face buried in his hands. I sat beside Carol, her breathing shallow and ragged, each inhale a labored struggle. I felt her hand in mine, the skeletal fingers clasping mine with surprising strength. Her grip was weak, but the pressure was undeniable. "Mark, he's a good boy," she rasped, her voice a mere whisper, the words punctuated by breaths. Make sure he's happy." I mumbled something noncommittal, a meaningless platitude. A strange mix of pity and impatience. The air was thick with the scent of impending death, the silence broken only by the rhythmic wheezing of her labored breath. I wanted it to be over. I wanted the ordeal to end, for her and for us. Then, with a final, rattling breath, she was gone. The room was still. The silence, now deafening, was broken only by the soft hum of the oxygen machine, a constant reminder of her absence. After the initial shock and the inevitable arrangements, the calls to family, the notifications, the overwhelming wave of grief and sympathy, we were left with the mundane tasks of clearing out her house. It was a large, meticulously decorated place, filled with antiques and Carol's carefully curated collection of, well, everything. Every object seemed to have a story, a purpose, and a place. It was a testament to her control, to her unwavering need for order. It was also, I realized, a representation of her life, a life she had carefully constructed, a life built on a foundation of secrets and lies. Mark was clearly struggling, his grief still raw and overwhelming. I did my best to take the lead. I sorted through papers, organized photos, and packed up belongings. The house felt empty, the air thick with the ghosts of memories. Amongst the clutter in her desk was a locked box. It was small, made of polished wood, and clearly old. It looked like it had been handcrafted, the wood rich and dark, the finish gleaming. It was elegant in its simplicity, a stark contrast to the ornate details that adorned the rest of the house. We tried the key ring, but neither of the keys looked like they fitted. We tried to jimmy it open, but to no avail. Mark was the one who finally said, "Let's just let it go, for now. It's probably just some jewelry or something. Nothing important." I agreed, of course. He was barely holding it together. The loss had clearly hit him harder than I anticipated. Seeing his distress made me feel a pang of guilt, a sharp reminder of my own detachment. After the funeral, and the endless procession of well-wishers, the obligatory condolences, the forced smiles, and the hushed whispers, we found ourselves back at her house. Everything felt empty. Hollow. The house, once filled with her presence, her voice, her carefully chosen belongings, now echoed with the silence of her absence. Mark had retreated into himself. He was distant, withdrawn, lost in the labyrinth of his grief. He barely spoke, and when he did, his voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He spent hours staring out the window, lost in his thoughts, reliving memories. And I was restless. I felt a persistent itch, a nagging curiosity that wouldn't let me rest. I knew the locked box was there, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. It was a puzzle, a mystery, and I felt compelled to solve it. Finally, after a week, I broached the subject. "Mark, have you thought about that box?" I asked, trying to sound casual, hoping to gauge his reaction. He looked up, surprised, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. "No, not really." "Why?" The question hung in the air, a thread of inquiry. His gaze flickered, searching for something in my expression, some indication of my true motives. I think we should go through it. Maybe there's something important." I watched him closely, saw a flicker of something in his eyes, guilt? Fear? But it was gone in a flash, quickly replaced by a veil of weariness. His face was etched with sorrow, a roadmap of the pain he was enduring. We sat down that evening, side by side, in front of the box. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a single lamp, casting long shadows across the room. The air was thick with a sense of anticipation, a silent promise of discovery. Mark reluctantly retrieved the key ring and we tried again. Still nothing. "It's probably nothing," Mark repeated, clearly wanting to drop the whole thing, wanting to preserve the image of his mother. He didn't want to dig up the past, to risk uncovering anything that might further complicate his grief. "Well, it's been nagging at me," I admitted, my curiosity getting the better of me, my inner detective finally winning out. "Let's just break it open." I offered it gently, letting him decide. He hesitated. His fingers traced the smooth surface of the box, his gaze lost in thought. "Are you sure? It feels wrong." The words were barely audible, a whisper of protest. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and vulnerability. "We're doing what needs to be done, honey," I said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his arm, hoping to sway him, to alleviate his hesitation. My voice was soft, soothing, designed to reassure him, to make him feel safe. And that seemed to sway him, slowly, reluctantly, but surely. We grabbed a screwdriver and took turns trying to pry it open. The metal of the lock scraped against the wood, the sound echoing in the silent room. Each scrape was a tiny act of defiance, a violation of the carefully constructed order Carol had created. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the lock gave way with a sharp, metallic crack. Inside, there were a few small items. A faded photograph of a smiling couple, the edges worn and creased with age. A tarnished silver locket, its intricate details hinting at a long-forgotten elegance. And a letter. A thick, carefully folded letter, tied with a faded silk ribbon. The scent of aged paper and dried ink filled the air, a scent that hinted at secrets and untold stories. Mark picked it up, his hands shaking. The tremor in his fingers was a stark contrast to his usual steadiness. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the delicate handwriting, the loops and flourishes that seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken words. He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself for an ordeal. He opened it. The silence of the room seemed to intensify, as the seconds stretched into an eternity. I watched his face as he began to read. First, confusion. Then, shock. Then, something that slowly morphed into devastation. His face went from pale to ashen. He handed the letter to me, his face ashen. The color had drained from his lips, leaving them a thin, bloodless line. "Read it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just, read it." His eyes were wide, filled with a raw, unadulterated terror. I took the letter, my hands trembling. The handwriting was Carol's, precise and familiar, each letter meticulously formed. It was a handwriting I had come to know intimately, a handwriting that had once filled the margins of her notes to me, criticizing my work, my appearance, or any perceived shortcomings. The handwriting was also familiar, comforting, and utterly terrifying. It was addressed to someone named Richard. The date on the letter was 25 years ago. I felt my heart begin to race, my breath catch in my throat. I could feel the blood rushing to my head. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Dearest Richard. I miss you terribly. Every day, I yearn for the life we could have had. But I'm trapped. Trapped in a marriage that suffocates me, in a life that I never wanted. I'm so sorry that I couldn't find the courage to leave. I was weak. I was afraid of what people would say, of what my family would think. I was, and still am, terrified of losing Mark. But I can't deny my feelings, not anymore. I love you, Richard. I always will. And I'll carry the secret of our shared happiness to my grave. With all my heart. Carol. I reread the letter, the words burning into my brain. The scent of the letter, the ink, the perfume of secrets filled the room. Richard? Richard, my mind raced, trying to process the information. The photograph in the box, the smiling couple, that wasn't Mark and Carol. It was Carol and another man. A man she'd loved, a man she'd been having an affair with. For years. And this letter, this confession of love, of a secret relationship, it was all for Richard. The carefully constructed facade of her life had cracked, and the truth was illing out. I looked at Mark. He was slumped in the chair, his face buried in his hands, the picture of utter despair. He was utterly destroyed. Who is Richard? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The words felt thick, heavy, almost impossible to speak. He didn't look up, just shook his head, his shoulders trembling. I don't know. The words were barely audible, a choked sob. It was like a dam had broken. The carefully constructed facade of our lives, of Carol's perfect image, had shattered. The lies, the manipulations, the years of subtle attacks, they all suddenly made sense. They all hinged on this one secret. Her bitterness, her dissatisfaction, her constant need to control, it was all rooted in the fact that she was living a life she didn't want, a life with a man she didn't truly love. The picture was now crystal clear. I suddenly felt a surge of anger? Resentment? No, it was more than that. It was a feeling of liberation. For years, I'd felt trapped, suffocated by her disapproval, by the knowledge that I was never good enough. Now, the truth was out. And the power she had held over me, it was gone. The shackles had fallen away. The woman I'd tried so hard to please, the woman who had relentlessly criticized and undermined me, had been a prisoner herself. A prisoner of her own choices, her own secrets. Mark, however, was still in the depths of despair. He spent days lost in his grief, barely talking, lost in his own thoughts, lost in the betrayal of his mother. He wandered the house, a ghost in his own home. He barely ate and rarely slept. I tried to comfort him, to offer support, but it was difficult. The revelation had changed everything. I couldn't pretend to be the supportive wife while silently battling the resentment that bubbled to the surface. It was a constant internal conflict, a battle between my desire to comfort him and my burgeoning sense of vindication. Then, one day, he asked me to drive him to see his father. Their relationship had always been complex, built on unspoken resentments and carefully guarded emotions. They weren't particularly close, his father and Mark, but I knew it was a significant request. It was a step towards seeking support, a sign that he was starting to come to terms with the devastating truth. So, I agreed. I would do whatever it took to help him heal. The journey felt long, filled with a heavy silence punctuated only by the gentle hum of the car engine. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of the secret that had shattered their lives. On the car journey, Mark revealed more. The man in the photograph, Richard, had been the best friend of his father. They'd worked together, holidayed together, shared countless meals and moments. They'd been as close as brothers. Even Mark had fond memories of him, of a kind, jovial man who always had a smile for him. He had vanished suddenly, mysteriously, after his wife became pregnant. Mark's father, of course, was equally crushed. The sudden absence of Richard had left a void in their lives, a wound that had never fully healed. When we arrived, Mark's father, Arthur, was surprised to see us. He lived in a modest bungalow on the edge of town. Arthur was in his early 70s, a sturdy man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor. The years had etched lines on his face, lines that spoke of a life lived, a life marked by both joy and sorrow. We spent the day with him, the three of us, a strange mix of grief and something else. Awkwardness. It was a delicate dance of emotions, a hesitant attempt to navigate the treacherous waters of their shared loss. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, Mark, still shaken, finally broached the topic. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you." The words were hesitant, filled with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. And he told him. He told him about the letter, about the secret affair, about the truth that had been hidden for decades. He saw his father's face go from shock to understanding. The initial surprise quickly faded, replaced by a profound sadness, a deep empathy for the betrayal that had been inflicted on him. Arthur listened, his face a mask of sorrow, but there was also a strange sense of relief. He explained that he'd always suspected something. He'd noticed the way Carol would look at Richard, the way she would light up when he was around. He dismissed his gut feelings, convinced that he was wrong, that he was simply being paranoid. He was devastated by the loss of his best friend, but also the thought that he had allowed himself to ignore his feelings. He had lived a life of denial. Mark then explained to Arthur that he was going to give Richard the letter. He knew that Richard was still alive. "Son," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's time to move on. Whatever happens, whatever pain we feel now, it won't last forever. Let Richard know the truth. Let them both rest in peace." His voice trembled as he spoke, each word a testament to the years of unspoken pain he had endured. He understood the need for closure, for the healing that could only come from confronting the truth. After a tense silence, he looked at me, a slow, gentle smile spreading across his face. "I always liked you, you know. Even when your mother wasn't particularly fond of you." He offered a warm smile, a genuine, sad smile, his eyes filled with a profound understanding. He recognized the pain I had endured, the struggle to earn her approval. "You are a good person, my dear, and you deserve happiness." His words were a balm to my wounded heart, a validation of my own worth. The next day, Mark, with my unwavering support, embarked on a quest to find Richard, the man who had been his mother's great love, the man who had stolen her heart. It was a painstaking process, a search that involved tracking down old records, contacting distant relatives, and following every possible lead. Finally, after weeks of searching, they located Richard. He was an old man now, frail and bent with age, his face etched with the passage of time. He lived a quiet life in a small cottage on the coast. He lived a simple life, a life of regret and solitude. Mark, his hands shaking, drove to Richard's home. He handed him the letter. He told him everything. Richard, now a frail old man, was understandably stunned. The weight of the past descended upon him, crushing the last vestiges of his fragile composure. He broke down in tears, the tears of a lifetime of unspoken longing and regret. He thanked Mark for finally revealing the truth. He told them that he'd spent his life wondering, regretting, wishing he'd been braver, wishing he had chosen to leave the life he was in. He told them that the affair was a deep, consuming love, that he felt a sense of happiness he had never known. Now, for the revenge. Because, let's be honest, I needed a little bit of payback. The discovery of the affair had left Mark reeling. It had shaken his world to its core. He had lost his mother. He'd lost the image of her he had carried in his heart, the woman he thought he knew. But it also seemed to have freed him. He'd been living under Carol's shadow for years. Now, that shadow was gone. He was now free to start living his own life. I, on the other hand, found myself with a different kind of freedom. And I decided to use it. It wasn't out of malice, not entirely. It was a way of reclaiming the power she had stolen from me, a way of finally silencing her voice, her constant criticisms. Carol had always been obsessed with appearances, with her carefully crafted image of perfection. Her house was a testament to her vanity, everything had to be just so. She would have wanted her possessions to be divided fairly. And the will? Well, Carol had left everything to Mark, but she'd made one stipulation, that Mark could not sell the house. She did not want anyone else to benefit from her wealth. I decided to change that. I knew that the house was Carol's pride and joy, the ultimate symbol of her status and wealth. It was her empire, her domain, her meticulously curated world. Selling it would be the ultimate slap in the face, a final act of defiance against her wishes. But I couldn't just suggest it. Mark was too emotional, too close to the situation, too vulnerable to make such a decision. I needed to play the long game. I needed to be patient. I needed to maneuver him slowly, gently, towards the outcome I desired. So, I focused on him. I was kind, supportive, patient. I cooked his favorite meals, the comfort food he craved in his time of sorrow. I listened to his stories, his memories, his fears. I allowed him to talk, to grieve, to heal. We started to spend more time together, laughing and reconnecting. We took long walks in the park, sat by the fireplace, and simply enjoyed each other's company. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I was just being cruel, if I was pushing him too far. But then I'd remember Carol's cutting words, her constant criticisms, her ability to make me feel small and insignificant. The memories spurred me on. And my resolve would harden. I reminded myself of her constant disapproval, her relentless attempts to make me feel inadequate. I was determined to reclaim my power, to take control of the situation. After several months of therapy, Mark became less distraught. The crushing weight of grief began to lift, replaced by a newfound sense of hope, a glimmer of resilience. We started to talk about the future. He started to acknowledge that things could get better. He agreed that the house was too much for him to manage on his own. It needed too much work, it was filled with bad memories, and the upkeep had become a burden. We spent endless hours in the house, and they only brought sadness. One evening, after months of patient maneuvering, and after Mark had slowly started tea. Oh, heal, and after the memories of the past had started to fade, he agreed with me. We were sitting on the sofa, looking at the house from afar. The setting sun cast a long shadow over the driveway. It was a dramatic, beautiful sunset, a reminder of the impermanence of life. I think, Mark said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet resolve, it's time to let the house go. The words came at the right time. My heart leaped with excitement. I had waited for this moment. Are you sure? I asked, trying to sound casual, trying not to reveal the surge of anticipation that coursed through me. Yes, he replied with a slow nod, I think it's what Mom would have wanted. She'd want me to move on, to build a life for myself. The sincerity in his voice was palpable, and I knew I had succeeded in convincing him. And I knew that it was now or never, I said it. This was the final step of my plan. And, the will says you can't sell it. You'll need to make a change. I put the idea out there for him to consider. He looked at me, and I saw a spark of something in his eyes. Anger? Resentment? Relief? It was all there, and more. A mixture of emotions swirled within him. The weight of his mother's influence had finally lifted, and he was ready to make a decision for himself. I continued, we can do it, Mark. We can take care of it. I offered a sense of comfort, a solution to the complex issue. So, you think, he trailed off, and I knew he was thinking of his mother. You think we should change her wishes? I nodded, my gaze steady. It's about what you want, and what will bring you happiness. This was the key, his happiness, his well-being. And he agreed. I was prepared. I had a lawyer already lined up. The will was amended. The house was put on the market. The process was quick, efficient, and, in the end, satisfying. The house was put on the market, and it was sold without a hitch. The day the house sold was a victory. A small one, perhaps, but it was ours. We celebrated with champagne, toasting to a new beginning. Mark was happier than I had seen him in months. The relief was evident on his face. I felt a sense of satisfaction, too. The house, Carol's monument to her self-importance, was no longer a weight on his shoulders. It was a symbol of freedom. The sale went through with the utmost efficiency. The house was emptied. The new owners were happy to get the house. I helped him sort through his mother's things. Some things he kept, some were donated. Mark seemed happier when going through those items. He kept his favorites and gave away some items he thought would make other people happy. And, in the end, that's what mattered. To see Mark thriving, to see him finally free from the shackles of his mother's influence. To see him smile again, to feel that the two of us were able to move forward, and start a new life, just the two of us. It was the ultimate revenge, the ultimate act of liberation. I had finally freed us both. The irony is, that the sale of Carol's house was actually good. It led us to move into a beautiful new place, a place that was ours, a place that was filled with sunlight and laughter. And it also spurred a chain of events that led to something else. The realization that what we thought was important, was not. The value of family, the need to forgive, and also the freedom to pursue what we wanted, and the opportunity to do better. Mark now works a job he loves, and travels the world. He is also happy with the life we have built together. We both spend quality time with each other. It's not a fairy tale, but it's a good life, a real life. It's a life built on truth, on forgiveness, and on the freedom to choose our own path. So, that's my story. A story of betrayal, secrets, and revenge. But most of all, it's a story about finding freedom, about letting go of the past and embracing the future. And I'm so grateful for it.